Hello and welcome. Tonight we're going to walk through a different side of Rome. Not the crowded streets and sunny ruins you see in travel photos, but the Rome that comes alive after dark. Empty streets, cold air, and buildings that have been standing for centuries, watching. Before we step inside, make sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this series on the Roman nightmares that still follow us today. Our first stop is one of the most famous landmarks in the world, but you've never seen it quite like this: the Colosseum at night. The Colosseum is not the same place at night as it is during the day. In daylight, it is a landmark surrounded by noise, camera shutters clicking, tour guides calling out to their groups, and the steady flow of visitors passing through its arches. At night, all of that disappears. The crowds leave, the street vendors pack up, and the wide area around the structure begins to feel strangely empty. The massive stone walls rise up in front of you, 4 tiers of arches stacked one on top of the other, their openings completely black against the dim light of the moon. You notice details you might not see in the day: the chips in the stone, the cracks running along its surface, the way certain parts seem to lean just slightly from centuries of settling dot. As you step closer, the ground under your feet feels uneven. Some of that comes from the wear of millions of footsteps over hundreds of years, but some comes from the earth itself shifting with time. There's a faint, cool smell in the air, part stone dust, part the dampness of a Roman night. Passing through one of the large arches into the interior, you immediately feel a change. Outside, the city air is open and wide, but inside the Colosseum it feels heavier, as if the building itself is holding on to the weight of everything it has seen. Your footsteps echo, but not evenly. In some places the sound comes back sharply, while in others it seems to vanish into the walls. The arena floor that once covered the hypogeum is gone now, leaving an exposed view of the underground maze. Down there are narrow corridors, animal cages, storage rooms, and the remains of the lifts that once carried fighters and creatures up into the arena above. Even in daylight, these spaces are shadowed, but at night they vanish into complete darkness. You imagine the noises that would have once filled this underground world: the rattle of chains, the creak of wood, the deep growl of an animal waiting to be released. Above all of that, you imagine the muffled roar of a crowd filtering down from the arena, a reminder that everything down here existed to feed the spectacle above. Walking along the curved outer corridors, you pass arch after arch, each one framing a different view. The stone is cold to the touch, colder than the air, as if it has been storing the chill of the night for centuries. Looking up, you can see the rows of seating rising steeply. In its prime, the Colosseum could hold more than 50,000 people each, seated according to their place in Roman society. Now those seats are empty, and in the dim light they seem to lean inward as though still watching the arena below. You notice small traces of the building's former decoration, a bit of carved marble here, a faint patch of paint there, reminders that this was once a colorful, decorated space. Not the bare ruin you see today. It's impossible to be here and not think about what this building was used for. It was not just an entertainment venue. It was a demonstration of power, a stage on which Rome reminded its people of the might of the empire. The events held here, gladiatorial combats, animal hunts, executions, were more than games. They were political theater. The emperor's presence at the games was a reminder of who decided life and death. Historians estimate that hundreds of thousands of people died in this arena over the centuries, along with countless animals brought from across the empire. For the spectators, it was thrilling. For those in the arena, it was a place where everything could be decided in an instant. Now, in the dark, you hear nothing of the noise that once filled the space. But it is not silence, not exactly. The wind moving through the arches makes a low, shifting sound. Sometimes it seems like a whistle. Sometimes it is more like a faint voice you can't quite make out. You might tell yourself it's just the wind, and it probably is, but the thought comes anyway, uninvited. You think of cheers. You think of shouts. You think of the metallic ring of weapons clashing somewhere below. You think of the moments when tens of thousands of eyes were fixed on one figure, waiting for the emperor's decision. Climbing one of the ancient staircases, you feel how uneven the steps are, worn down in the middle from centuries of use. The walls of the staircase close and around you, and the air feels cooler as you rise. At the top, you reach one of the higher seating levels and look down over the entire arena. From here, you see the Colosseum as both vast and contained, a huge stone bowl open to the sky. The moonlight spills across the Hypogeum, turning the dark underground passages into an irregular grid of black and silver. Beyond the walls, the modern city glows faintly, but it feels far away. This space feels separate from time. You stand there for a while, letting your eyes adjust. The more you look, the more details appear. The rough texture of the stone, the thin green line of moss growing in a crack, the repeating rhythm of arches upon arches fading into shadow. For a moment, you can almost imagine the seats filled again, the arena floor restored, the sound of the crowd rising. Then, just as easily, the vision fades, and you're left with the quiet shell of the building and the slow movement of night air around you. When you finally walk back out through the arches, into the open space outside, you realize you've been moving more slowly than you thought. The Colosseum is just a building now, but you can still feel the tension it was built to hold. It was a place where fear and excitement lived side by side, where life and death were part of the same show, and that history hasn't entirely gone away. You leave it behind you in the dark, but you know it will be there tomorrow, and the next day, and long after that, still standing, still watching, still keeping its shadows. Pompeii is quiet now. It has been quiet for almost 2,000 years. When you arrive, the first thing you notice is how still the air feels, as though it is part of the ruins themselves. There is no movement in the streets except for your own. No sound except the faint scrape of your footsteps on the uneven stones. The city does not look like most ruins. Its streets are intact, lined with buildings that still have walls, doorways, and in some cases entire rooms. The eruption that destroyed Pompeii also preserved it, sealing it beneath ash and rock for centuries. And as you walk, you can feel how that moment, the moment it all ended, is still here. The paving stones of the main streets are worn smooth in the center, showing where carts once passed. Between the stones are patches of green moss and small plants, reminders that time continues even in a place where history feels frozen. On either side are the remains of shops and houses. You can still see the counters of food stalls, the outlines of storage jars, and the faint traces of painted signs advertising goods that will never be sold again. The walls of some buildings still carry fragments of frescoes, faded reds, yellows, and blues forming patterns, flowers, and scenes from daily life. These decorations were meant to be seen in motion, with people passing by, talking, laughing. Now they stand in complete stillness. The stillness is the most striking thing. Pompeii is not like a ruin where time slowly wore everything away. It is a place where time stopped all at once. You imagine the streets on that day in the year 79 CE. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius began with a column of ash rising into the sky. People must have been confused at first, perhaps curious. But soon the ash began to fall, light at first, then heavier. Roofs sagged under its weight. The air grew thick and hard to breathe. You picture people hurrying through these same streets, calling to each other, carrying whatever they could in their arms. Some fled, but others stayed, maybe thinking the danger would pass, maybe unable to leave. As the hours passed, the ash grew deeper. Then came the pyroclastic surges, fast-moving, clouds of gas, ash, and rock that rushed down the volcano's slopes. In moments they filled the streets with heat and darkness. Those who remained were caught where they stood, their bodies quickly covered and buried. The city disappeared beneath the ash. Centuries later, when excavations began, the ash still held the shapes of those bodies. Archaeologists poured plaster into the hollow spaces left behind, creating casts that show the positions people were in at the moment they died. You may have seen them in photographs. A man curled on his side, an arm over his head. A woman lying on her back, one hand at her throat. A child pressed close to an adult, both caught in the same instant of fear. Walking the streets today, you are aware that these moments happened right here, in the exact spaces you are passing. The light in Pompeii changes with the time of day, but in the evening it softens, making the shadows longer. The outlines of the buildings become sharper, and the details of the walls seem to stand out more. You step into one of the larger houses, an atrium with a rectangular opening in the roof. Rainwater once fell through that opening into a shallow pool in the center of the floor. Now the pool is dry, and the only movement above is a small bird crossing the square of sky. The walls are decorated with faded paintings of gardens and landscapes, an illusion of nature inside the home. You can imagine someone sitting here 2,000 years ago, listening to the sound of rain falling into the pool. Outside again, you follow the road toward the edge of the city, passing the remains of bakeries with stone mills and ovens still in place. You think of the last loaves of bread baked here, left unfinished when the eruption came. At the city's edge, you reach the necropolis, where tombs line the road. Some are simple stone markers, Others are larger, with carved inscriptions and statues. The people buried here died long before the eruption, but the same ash that covered the city also covered the necropolis. Preserving it as it was, Pompeii is often described as a tragedy, and it was. But walking here, you realize it is also a kind of record, a moment in history captured with more detail than almost any other ancient site. The streets, the buildings, the objects left behind, even the positions of the people, they are all pieces of that single day in 79 CE. It is as if the city is holding its breath, waiting for something that will never happen. As you leave, the air feels the same as when you arrived, still heavy and strangely calm. The volcano looms in the distance, its slopes quiet under the fading light. It is easy to forget, looking at it now, that it can destroy a city in hours. But Pompeii does not let you forget entirely. The frozen streets, the preserved walls, and the shapes of the people caught in their final moments remain here, a reminder that the past is never as far away as it seems. The Roman roads were built to last, and in many places they still exist today, stretching out in straight lines across fields, forests, and hills. In daylight, they are an impressive reminder of the empire's engineering skill. At night, they are something else entirely. The same straight lines that feel clear and purposeful in the day and feel endless in the dark. You can stand on one of these roads and see it vanish into the distance, swallowed by shadows with no way to know what might be waiting just beyond your sight. The surface underfoot is made of large, flat stones, worn smooth by centuries of use. In the moonlight, they have a dull shine, reflecting just enough light to outline the path. The road is slightly raised in the center to let rainwater run off to the sides. On either side are ditches or embankments, sometimes lined with low stone walls. In the day, you might notice the details, the careful fitting of the stones, the drainage channels, the milestones marking the distance to the next town. But in the night, your attention is on the sound of your footsteps and the dark shapes of the landscape around you. In the time of the Roman Empire, these roads were the main arteries of movement. Soldiers marched along them in columns. Merchants drove carts loaded with goods. Messengers carried urgent orders, and travelers on foot moved from one settlement to another. By night, though traffic was rare, most people chose to rest once the sun went down. Those who traveled after dark did so for specific reasons, a military dispatch that couldn't wait, a merchant trying to make up for lost time, or someone with business they didn't want seen in daylight. Walking one of these roads at night, you would have been surrounded by silence, broken only by the wind in the grass, the occasional call of a night bird, or the distant sound of water if the road crossed a river. But there were other sounds, too, the kind that made travelers quicken their pace. The crack of a branch somewhere off the road, the rhythmic plop of hooves far behind, growing louder, the whisper of movement in the bushes just far enough away that you couldn't see its source. The Romans knew the dangers of night travel. Bandits were a constant threat, especially in remote stretches far from garrison towns. Some groups waited for travelers in wooded areas where the road narrowed. Others operated in open country, using speed and surprise to attack. Wild animals could also be a danger. Wolves in some regions, bears in others. And then there was the weather. A sudden rainstorm could turn the roads slippery, fill the ditches with water, and make the next settlement feel much farther away. Yet for all these risks, there is a strange calm in imagining yourself on one of these roads with no one else in sight. The air is cooler than in the day. The stars above are bright, unhindered by the light of cities. The road stretches ahead, steady and unchanging, as it has for centuries. You might pass the dark outline of a milestone, its carved letters barely visible in the low light, telling you how far it is to the next town. You might cross a small stone bridge over a stream, hearing the water moving beneath you before the sound fades back into silence. Occasionally, the road passes close to a villa or a small cluster of buildings. A faint light from a window or the smell of wood smoke might reach you, signs of life in the middle of the darkness. But most of the time, the night roads belong only to you and the landscape. You walk with the steady rhythm of your own steps, feeling the stones underfoot, keeping your eyes on the pale line of the road ahead. These roads were built for the empire's purposes, military, economic, political, but they also connected ordinary lives in countless ways. The same route a legion marched in armor might later be used by a farmer bringing grain to market. The path taken by an imperial messenger at night might be the same one a family used to visit relatives in another town. At night, all those uses blend into the same quiet emptiness, the same sense of being a small figure moving through a very large space dot. As you walk, it's easy to imagine the countless others who have taken this road before you. Soldiers returning from campaign, traders moving goods across provinces, runaways seeking freedom or safety, lovers meeting in secret, all of them passing along the same stones, seeing the same stars, hearing the same sounds of the night. The road has kept their footsteps, in a way, holding the memory of their passage even as centuries have gone by. By the time you see the faint outline of the next settlement ahead, the road feels like it has carried you through more than just distance. You step off the stones into the softer ground of the town's edge, hearing the shift in sound as the surface changes beneath your feet. Behind you, the road disappears back into the darkness, stretching away toward places you can't see. It will be there tomorrow and the next night and long after, waiting for the next traveler to follow its line through the shadows. In the heart of Rome, far from the noise of markets and the shouts of chariot races, there were buildings where the fate of the empire was decided. By day, the marble halls of the Senate and other government chambers echoed with voices, speeches, delivered in measured tones, arguments rising and falling, the scrape of sandals on polished floors. By night, the same spaces took on a very different character. The voices were gone. The vast columns stood in silence. The cool air held the faint smell of wax from extinguished lamps. And somewhere in those empty halls, decisions made during the day were still at work, moving unseen through the city. Political power in Rome did not sleep when the meetings ended. Deals made in the Senate were reinforced in private rooms, over quiet conversations between small groups of men. who understood that real influence often came from what was agreed upon in the shadows, not from what was spoken in public. These halls, when empty, were not entirely at rest. The marble walls had heard too much, had absorbed too many promises, betrayals, and carefully calculated lies to be truly silent. You imagine walking into one of these halls after the day's business is done. The doors are heavy, their hinges creaking faintly as you push them open. Inside, the light from a few oil lamps still burns low, casting long, unsteady shadows across the floor. The marble is cold under your feet, and the sound of your steps carries up to the high ceiling. You can see the curved rows of seats where senators had sat earlier, their positions marked not by signs but by tradition and status. At the front is the platform where speakers stood, and behind it the tall, fluted columns that give the room its sense of authority in the day. This is where laws were proposed, alliances were formed, and reputations were destroyed. At night, you can almost hear the echoes of those events, the murmur of discussion, the sudden burst of applause, the sharper sound of a voice raised in anger. You know that beyond the official business, there were always private agendas. At work, some senators acted for the good of Rome as they saw it. Others acted for their own gain. Many managed to do both at once. The most dangerous decisions were rarely written down. They were passed along in whispers, sealed with a look or a subtle gesture, a promise of support in exchange for future loyalty, a warning about arrivals, plans, a suggestion that an enemy might soon have an accident on the road. These agreements traveled far from the marble halls, carried out in streets, taverns, and villas. But their origins often began here, in the quiet moments between public debates, when a single sentence could change the course of a career or a life. You walk to one of the columns and place your hand on its surface. It is smooth and cool, worn slightly in places where people have brushed past it for generations. This stone has stood through countless meetings, seen power pass from one set of hands to another, watched as new faces replaced old ones in the curved rows of seats. It has been here for triumphs and disasters alike, the passing of laws that strengthened the empire, and the passing of laws that set it on the path to conflict and decline. The stillness of the hall now feels different. It is not the stillness of abandonment, but the pause between movements in a long performance. You can sense that plans are still unfolding somewhere in the city, letters being written, messages being delivered, instructions being given to trusted allies. Tomorrow, the hall will fill again with the sound of debate. Some of the men will stand and speak with conviction about matters they believe in. Others will speak just as forcefully about positions they don't truly hold, because they have already been promised something in return for their performance as you leave the hall. The heavy doors closing behind you, the city's night air feels warmer. Somewhere nearby, you hear the faint splash of a fountain and the distant voices of people still awake. But behind those marble walls and the echo of footsteps on stone, the machinery of Roman politics continues to turn, silent. Now, but ready to speak again when the sun rises. The empty baths after dark in the daytime. A Roman bath complex was one of the busiest and loudest places in the city. It was not simply a place to get clean. It was a social hub, a place to meet friends, exchange news, do business, or simply be seen. The air would be filled with voices, footsteps on wet tiles, splashes of water, and the clatter of servants carrying towels or trays of food. Marble floors would shine in the sunlight coming through high windows. Pools of different temperatures would be crowded, with men and women in separate areas, each going through the familiar sequence of bathing. But at night, all of that was gone. The great doors were shut, the attendants had left, and the fires that heated the water had been reduced to glowing embers. The vast rooms that had felt almost too full during the day were now empty, echoing, and cool. You push the door open just enough to slip inside, and the sound it makes seems too loud for the stillness. Inside, the air smells faintly of damp. Stone and cooling water dot. The Roman bath complex was a carefully designed sequence of spaces. Even without the people, the building still seems to guide you along the same path a visitor would take during the day. You begin in the appetitorium, the changing room. Rows of niches line the walls, each one large enough for clothing and personal belongings. During the day, this room would have been filled with the sound of conversation, the rustle of cloth, and the occasional shout to an attendant. Now it is quiet, the niches empty except for a forgotten cloth or a dropped sandal. The floor, made of mosaic tiles, is still slightly damp under your feet. From there you step into the frigidarium, the cold room. The pool here is still, the surface reflecting the dim light from the few lamps left burning. The water looks black in the low light, and you can see faint ripples spreading out from where a drop of water falls from the ceiling. The marble benches along the walls are empty, and the air feels cooler here, with a faint current that moves across your skin. During the day, this was where people would brace themselves for the shock of cold water after the warmer rooms. At night, the cold is sharper, not a playful challenge, but a steady presence. Beyond the frigidarium is the tepidarium, the warm room. The air is still faintly heated, the floor warm underfoot from the hypocaust system beneath. The warmth carries a smell of wet stone and faint traces of oil and perfume from the many visitors who passed through earlier. This was often the place where people lingered, enjoying the balance between the cold and hot rooms. The benches here look comfortable in the lamplight, but there is no one to sit on them now. The faint sound of water dripping somewhere far away is the only noise. Then comes the caldarium, the hot room. The air here still holds some of the day's heat, though without the fires it is fading. The steam has settled into a light mist that clings to the marble. You walk along the edge of the hot pool, its surface dark and glossy in the low light. The sound of your steps changes as you cross different sections of the floor. Here, a hollow tone from the hypocaust chambers below. There, a heavier, more solid sound. In the daytime, this room would have been filled with the hiss of steam, the murmur of voices, and the occasional splash. Now the mist is still, and the silence feels heavier. Many bath complexes also had other rooms, massage areas, exercise courtyards, even small libraries. You wander into one of the side chambers where oil jars are lined up on shelves, their lids sealed. The smell here is stronger, a mix of olive oil, herbs, and something faintly sweet. In the day, attendants would rub oil into visitors' skin before scraping it off with a curved metal tool called a strigil. Now the shelves stand untouched, and a thin layer of dust has settled on some of the less used jars. The exercise courtyard, or palestra, lies beyond a set of doors. The night air is cooler here, and the moonlight falls across the paving stones. You can see the outline of the running track and the open space where ball games were played. The sound of the city is faint but present. A cart rumbling down, a distant street, the bark of a dog somewhere far away. During the day, this space would be full of movement and energy. Now it feels still, as if it is holding its breath until morning. Back inside, the echoes follow you. Even the smallest sound, the creak of a door, the splash of your foot in a shallow puddle, carries through the empty halls. The design of these baths was meant to impress, with high ceilings, grand arches, and decorative columns. Without people to fill the space, those features feel even larger. The emptiness makes you notice details you might miss in the daytime. A crack in a tile, the faint wear on a step where countless feet have passed, the way the light from a lamp catches in the gold flecks of a mosaic dot. You pass through another frigidarium on your way out, this one larger, with statues standing along the sides of the pool. In the day, these statues would seem like decoration, but at night, with the flicker of the lamps, they look almost alive. The light makes their eyes seem to follow you, and the sound of water dripping nearby feels timed to your steps. You pause for a moment, and the room seems to grow even quieter. The baths were not only for cleanliness, they were part of the rhythm of Roman life. People came here to meet others, to discuss business, to hear news, to relax after work. The emptiness at night feels like the pause in a conversation that will resume tomorrow. You can almost hear the phantom sounds of the day. Laughter from one corner, the clatter of a dropped cup, the splash of someone diving into the pool. But those sounds fade quickly, replaced by the real quiet of the sleeping building. As you reach the entrance again, you look back down the length of the main hall. The marble gleams faintly in the low light. The pools are still, the benches empty, the statues motionless. The baths wait, ready for the return of voices, movement, and heat with the next sunrise. Outside, the city's night air feels fresher, carrying the faint smell of the Tiber and the distant murmur of a tavern. Behind you, the heavy doors close, sealing the quiet inside until morning. The last light in the Forum. The Roman Forum was the heart of the ancient city, a place where politics, business, religion, and daily life all overlapped. By day, it was alive with movement. Merchants calling out to sell their goods, advocates delivering speeches in the law courts, senators walking in pairs and talking in low tones, priests performing rituals at temples. The open space between the great buildings would be filled with footsteps, voices, and the sound of carts passing along the stone-paved streets. But as the day came to an end, the Forum changed. The noise began to fade. Stalls closed, shutters were drawn, and the merchants carried away what they could not sell. The officials and petitioners left the government buildings. The priests finished their last duties for the day and returned to their homes. The great open space emptied. and the shadows began to stretch longer between the marble columns. You enter the forum now in the final light of the day. The sun is low, its rays slipping between the tall columns and the edges of rooftops. The stone underfoot is still warm from the heat of the afternoon, and your footsteps sound sharper in the quiet. Without the crowd, you can hear things that are usually lost in the noise. The soft rustle of wind through a row of banners, the distant splash of water from the fountain near the basilica, the faint clink of a chain as someone locks a door. Forum is surrounded by monuments that have stood for centuries. The Temple of Saturn, its tall columns catching the last gold of the sun, looms over the western side. In the day, this is a place of business. The state treasury is housed here, but now it is still, the air cooler in its shadow. To the east, the Arch of Septimius Severus frames a view of the Capitoline Hill, the carvings on its surface, telling stories of military victories, are softened by the fading light. You walk toward the Basilica Julia, its long rows of columns forming a path of shadow and light. In the daytime, the basilica is filled with legal proceedings, people arguing cases, clerks scratching notes onto wax tablets, messengers hurrying in and out. Now you hear only the echo of your own steps and the faint whisper of wind through the open arches. The marble floor, worn smooth by countless feet, reflects the sky's changing colors. From here you can see the rostra, the platform where speakers address the crowd. In the late afternoon, the voices that once rang out here are long gone, but it's easy to imagine them, the rise and fall of rhetoric, the murmur of approval, the sudden bursts of applause or shouts of disagreement. You picture the orators, standing proudly, their togas arranged just so, their hands raised to make a point. Now the platform is empty, the only sound a bird calling from the roof of a nearby temple dot. At the center of the forum, the paving stones form an open space where people once gathered to meet, trade, or simply talk. The surface is uneven in places. Worn by centuries of use, you pause here and let your eyes follow the line of columns that lead toward the Temple of Castor and Pollux. These three tall columns are all that remains of a once grand structure, but in the golden light they look almost complete again, their fluted shafts glowing softly. The last light touches the Temple of Vesta, a small, round building that once held the sacred flame of Rome. The flame was tended by the Vestal virgins, who lived in the nearby house of the Vestals. Now the temple is closed for the night, the doorway shadowed, but you can imagine the warm glow inside, the soft crackle of fire, the low voices of the women who guarded it. The gardens around the house of the Vestals are quiet, the pools still. The statues of past Vestals watching in the fading light dot as the sun sinks lower. The shadows grow longer, stretching across the open space and climbing the walls of the basilicas. The colors shift. The white marble turns to soft gold, then to gray, and the sky deepens to a muted blue. A few oil lamps are lit at doorways, their flames flickering in the breeze. The scent of cooking fires from nearby houses begins to drift into the air, carrying with it the faint aroma of bread and herbs. You walk toward the eastern end of the forum, where the temple of Antoninus and Faustina stands. Its columns are massive, and in the low light, The grooves seem deeper, the stone darker. The carved details on the frieze catch the light in a way that makes them look almost alive. A single bird circles overhead, its shadow sliding across the steps. From here you can see the Basilica Aemilia, once a place for business and banking. The marble floor inside is cool now, the heat of the day fading. The tall columns cast strong shadows, creating patterns across the walls and floor. You can almost hear the clink of coins being counted, the low murmur of negotiation, the rustle of scrolls being unrolled and examined. But tonight there is nothing but stillness. The forum's edges are lined with smaller buildings and shrines, each with its own story. You pass the shrine of Janus, its double doors closed, a sign of peace in the empire. The bronze doors are dark in the evening light, their surfaces worn but still solid. Nearby, a small altar stands, its surface smooth. From years of offerings as the sun finally dips below the horizon, the first stars appear in the darkening sky. The marble and stone of the forum reflect the cool light of the moon, giving the place a different kind of beauty. The air is cooler now, and the sounds of the city at night begin to rise. The call of a vendor closing his stall in a nearby street, the distant rattle of a cartwheel, the faint laughter from a tavern. You stand in the center of the forum, surrounded by history. Every column, every arch, every worn stone beneath your feet has seen centuries of life. In the quiet of the evening, the past feels closer. You can imagine the great processions moving through this space, the triumphal arches decorated with flowers, the crowds cheering as victorious generals pass by. You can picture the debates, the deals, the celebrations, and the griefs that have all played out here. Now, it is only you and the night. The oil lamps flicker in the distance, casting pools of light that leave the spaces between them in shadow. The forum rests, waiting for the next day's business, the next gathering, the next moment in its long history. The last light has faded, but the presence of all that has happened here lingers in the cool air. You turn to leave, walking slowly toward the edge of the forum. Behind you, the marble columns stand like silent sentinels in the moonlight. Ahead, the narrow streets of the city stretch out, leading into the night. The heart of Rome is quiet now, but its pulse has not stopped. It simply waits, as it has for centuries, for the sun to rise again. The vanishing of the Ninth Legion. The story begins on the very edge of Rome's empire, far from the marble forums and sunlit villas of Italy. Here, in the mist-covered hills of northern Britain, the land was wilder, the weather harsher, and the nights longer. The Ninth Legion, Legio IX Hispana, had been stationed here for years. They were seasoned soldiers, veterans of campaigns across the empire. Their shields were dented from battles fought in distant lands, and their sandals had walked the length of provinces most Romans in the capital had never even heard of. In the daytime, their fortress at Ebrocombe, modern-day York, was alive with activity. The clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the barked orders of officers drilling their men, the creak of wagons bringing supplies from the countryside. The legionaries trained, maintained their weapons, and repaired their gear. They wrote letters home, carved their names into the wooden beams of the barracks, and watched the horizon for signs of trouble. But this was a restless land. Beyond the Roman roads and fortifications, the hills and forests belonged to tribes who had not accepted Roman rule. They watched from the tree line, moved silently along ridges, and struck suddenly when the opportunity arose. The Ninth Legion knew this, and they were prepared, or so they thought. One day in the early years of the 2nd century, orders came. The Ninth was to march north, beyond the safety of their fortress, to deal with an uprising. The details were scarce, but the threat was considered serious enough to require the entire legion. Nearly 5,000 men prepared to leave. Soldiers, officers, engineers, medical staff, and support personnel. Their banners were cleaned, their armor polished, and their supply wagons loaded in the cool gray light of dawn. The gates of Eberacon opened, and the Ninth Legion marched out. The sound of their footsteps on the stone road was steady, the glint of their helmets catching what little sun broke through the clouds. The local townspeople watched them go, some with respect, others with worry. The column stretched for a long distance, centuries of men in formation, followed by carts pulled by mules, the creak of leather harnesses, and the rattle of iron fittings marking their passage. They headed north, into land where the Roman roads became less certain, where maps were little more than suggestions, and where the hills could hide entire armies. The first days were uneventful. They marched, set up camp each night in neat squares, dug ditches, and built wooden palisades around their tents. Fires burned in the darkness, and the smell of cooking mingled with the damp air. But the further they went, the more the land seemed to close in around them. The forest grew thicker, the hills steeper, and the weather colder. The clouds hung low, and rain came without warning, soaking cloaks and chilling the men to the bone. The sound of birds and wind in the trees was broken only by the distant echo of something else, movement perhaps just beyond sight. Scouts were sent out, but they reported little. Still, the officers felt the tension in the air. At night, the sentry stood watch by the palisade, eyes straining to catch movement. In the darkness, sometimes they heard noises, the crack of a branch, the faint thump of something moving through the underbrush. Once, a spear was found just beyond the camp, its wooden shaft still damp from the rain. It had not been there the night before. The days of marching continued. The legion moved deeper into the hills, following a route that would take them to a tribal stronghold known to be resisting Roman control. The weather worsened. Mist clung to the ground in the mornings, rising from the valleys like smoke. Visibility dropped to a few dozen paces in any direction, and the men marched in a world of shifting gray. Then came the last night anyone saw them. The camp was set up in a valley, with the hills close on either side. The palisade was built, the watch fires lit, and the men took their places for guard duty. The officers met in the center tent to discuss the next day's plan. Somewhere out in the mist, there was movement. A shape here, a shadow there. The sound of distant horns, low, mournful notes, floated on the night air. The attack, if it came, left no survivors to tell the tale. What happened in the hours before dawn remains a mystery. Some say the camp was surrounded, the legion overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Others believe the enemy used the fog to slip inside the camp, striking silently until the alarm was too late. There are even stories of the ground itself working against them. Sudden bogs, shifting earth, and unseen ravines swallowing men whole. What is certain is that the Ninth Legion never returned to Ebracum. No survivors limped back to tell the story. The townspeople waited, watching the road for the familiar banners, but days turned into weeks, and no one came. Eventually, a small party of soldiers was sent north to find them. They found no camp, no bodies, no weapons, only fragments, a broken shield, a spear haft with no head, a single sandal lying in the mud. The official records in Rome grew quiet about the 9th. Some suggested they had been reassigned to another province. Their disappearance in Britain never fully explained. Others whispered that the empire simply preferred not to speak of such a loss. It was better for morale if the fate of the 9th was left vague. Yet the people of the North told their own stories of a night when the hills echoed with the clash of iron and the cries of men, and when the mists carried away an entire legion. In the centuries that followed, the land reclaimed whatever remained of them. The forests grew thicker, the paths vanished, and the rain washed away all but the faintest traces. Archaeologists have searched, finding bits of armor, rusted nails from tent poles, and other scattered remnants. But the full truth, the final moments of the Ninth Legion, has never been uncovered. Standing there today in the same mists that once swallowed 5,000 men, you can almost hear it, the distant beat of marching feet, the creak of leather, the low murmur of voices in Latin, and then, just as quickly, the sound fades, leaving only the wind in the grass and the soft drip of water from the trees. The Ninth Legion is gone, but the emptiness they left behind still lingers, heavy in the air. The whispering waters of the Tiber River was always more than just a ribbon of water running through Rome. Long before the first stones of the city were set in place, the Tiber was already there, winding through valleys, gliding past groves of oak and olive, catching the light of the sun on its slow-moving surface. By the time Rome was built, the river had become part of the city's life, its daily rhythm, and its unspoken memory. In the day, the river was busy. Boats ferried goods from the ports downriver, carrying amphorae filled with wine and olive oil, sacks of grain, and crates of fruit. Barges moved slowly under the bridges, their crews calling out to one another as they poled along the current. On the banks, washerwomen scrubbed clothes against smooth stones, while children splashed in the shallows. The sound of water mingled with the shouts of traders and the calls of gulls circling overhead. But as evening came, the noise faded. The boats moored along the bank, their ropes creaking softly as the current tugged against them. The washerwomen left, their baskets balanced on their hips. The shadows of the buildings stretched long across the water, and the air cooled. The Tiber changed. It became slower, quieter, more secretive, a different river entirely from the one that bustled under the daylight. You walk along the embankment now, the stones still faintly warm from the day's sun. The smell of the river is in the air, a mix of earth, water, and something faintly metallic. The surface is calm, but it moves with a steady purpose, carrying leaves, twigs, and the occasional piece of driftwood toward the sea. The reflections of the bridges shimmer, broken by the ripples that spread from a passing fish just beneath the surface. The first lamps are being lit along the banks. Their warm glow spills onto the water, stretching into long, wavering lines of gold. Above you, the Ponte Sublicio stands dark against the deepening sky, its arches catching the last light of the day. Once this bridge was made of wood, built to be taken apart quickly in times of danger. Now it is solid stone, and its piers stand firm against the current dot as you walk. The sound of the city fades, replaced by the quiet, constant murmur of the water. It is not entirely silent. The Tiber seems to speak in its own language. The water laps gently at the stones, swirls softly around pilings, and sighs as it flows past the bends. In the stillness, it sounds almost like whispering. You pause and listen, and it feels as though the river is telling stories, not in words you can fully understand, but in a rhythm that has been flowing here for centuries. The stories might be about the first settlers who came to these banks, building huts and fishing from small boats. Or they might be about the days when Rome was an empire, and the river was a highway for goods, armies, and messages from across the known world. The Tiber has seen grain ships from Egypt unloading at the port, war galleys passing under the bridges, and barges loaded with marble from quarries far to the north dot. As the light fades further, the sky deepens into a soft indigo. The first stars appear, faint but steady. The river catches the light of the moon, turning its surface into a slow-moving ribbon of silver. A breeze rises, carrying with it the scent of night-blooming flowers from gardens along the upper banks. Somewhere nearby, a small bell rings, the signal from a boat preparing to cast off under the cover of darkness. You reach a quieter part of the river, where the bank slopes gently and the trees lean over the water. Here the whispering is clearer. The water swirls around the roots of an old plane tree, making a sound like a low hum. A pair of herons stand in the shallows, their long necks motionless as they watch for fish. In the distance, the shape of an island breaks the flow of the current. This is Tiber Island, linked to the banks by stone bridges. Tiber Island has always had its own stories. In ancient times, it was a place of healing, home to a temple of Aesculapius, the god of medicine. Pilgrims came here seeking cures, bringing offerings and prayers. The river would have watched them arrive, carrying their small boats toward the island's shores. Even now, at night, the island feels apart from the rest of the city, its edges lapped by the same water that flows through the forum's shadow. You pause on the bridge and watch the current split around the island, swirling into eddies before rejoining on the other side. The sound is steady and soft, like the murmur of a conversation carried on for so long that no one remembers when it began. The moonlight pools in the sheltered spaces along the bank, and the air feels cooler here, touched by the water's chill. Past the island, the river widens again. You follow the embankment toward the next bridge, your footsteps echoing faintly in the stillness. The Tiber's voice follows you, the lap of waves against stone, the occasional splash as something falls into the water, the whispering rush as the current slips past. Somewhere far upstream, a small boat drifts with the flow, its oars drawn, and the boatman letting the river carry him through the night. The Tiber has been here through every chapter of Rome's history. It has seen the first walls rise, the triumphal processions pass, the fires that once swept through the city, and the rebuilding that followed. It has carried away the ashes of the dead, the hopes of merchants, and the secrets of those who preferred not to be seen. In the stillness of night, it seems to remember all of it, holding the memories in its endless flow. You stop again and lean on the stone parapet, looking down at the water. It moves without hurry, without pause, its surface hiding whatever lies. Beneath, the light from a nearby lantern falls across it, and for a moment the ripples seem to spell something out, a pattern, a message before shifting again into something unreadable. The whispering grows softer, as though the river has decided to keep its secrets for now. When you finally turn to leave, the Tiber continues on, flowing past the bridges, under the walls, and out toward the sea. The whispering fades behind you, replaced by the quiet hum of the city at night. But you carry it with you, the sense of an ancient presence moving silently through the heart of Rome, speaking in a voice that has never been silent, only overlooked. Vestal shadows and hidden rituals, the Forum Romanum was never truly empty. Even in the deep hours of the night, when the shops were closed and the marble temples stood silent in the moonlight, there was always movement somewhere, the soft steps of a watchman, the distant bark of a dog, the rustle of wind through colonnades. But in the heart of the Forum, there was one place where the silence felt deeper, older, and heavier than anywhere else, the house of the Vestals. In the day. The Atrium Vesta was a place of order and ritual. It stood behind the small, round temple of Vesta, its courtyard lined with statues of past chief priestesses, each set on a marble pedestal, each bearing an inscription. The air smelled faintly of burning wood from the eternal flame that the Vestal virgins kept alive without pause. Water from their private spring was carried to cleanse the shrine. Their footsteps echoed softly in the shaded corridors, but at night the house of the Vestals seemed to withdraw from the rest of the city. The sound of the fountains in the courtyard was louder in the stillness. The shadows of the statues stretched across the paving stones. The tall walls blocked much of the moonlight, leaving only narrow paths of silver that slipped between the columns. The Vestals were Rome's most sacred women, chosen as children to serve for 30 years. They lived apart from their families, apart from the ordinary life of the city. Their main duty was to keep the sacred flame burning. For as long as it burned, Rome's safety was assured. Let it go out, and the city risked divine anger. But the flame was not the only part of their service. The Vestals performed rituals unseen by the public, ceremonies so old that their full meaning was remembered only in fragments. If you were to stand outside their walls in the quiet of night, you might hear faint sounds from within, the steady tread of footsteps, the low murmur of voices speaking words in an ancient cadence, the crackle of firewood in the temple hearth. Sometimes a shadow would cross the light spilling from a doorway, a brief glimpse of a white-robed figure before the door closed again. The rituals were tied to the cycles of the year. In the early months, they prepared sacred cakes of salted flour offered in the name of Vesta. During the Vestaya in June, they opened the temple to mothers of the city, but in the night, they performed rites to cleanse the shrine, moving silently in the lamplight. They tended to sacred objects that no outsider was allowed to see, relics kept in a chest beneath the temple, guarded by secrecy as much as by walls. The house of the Vestals itself was a world apart. It had gardens where the moonlight fell, untrimmed hedges and pools of still water. It had storerooms filled with ritual tools, bronze vessels polished until they gleamed, woven garlands dried and stored for the next festival, and long-handled ladles for pouring libations. The private rooms of the priestesses opened onto a central hall, where the soft glow of an oil lamp might be seen late at night. Punishment for breaking their vows was severe, especially for the vow of chastity, for the Vestals were considered brides of the state, and their purity was thought to ensure Rome's safety. But those punishments were not carried out in the open. The city might hear whispers, might see signs, a procession leaving the forum at dusk, a closed litter carrying someone away. But the full rituals of judgment and removal were hidden from the public eye. The shadows of the house of the Vestals kept those secrets as well. Some said that on certain nights when the moon was high and the streets were quiet, the Vestals performed rites not even the priests of other temples knew about. They would gather in the courtyard, their white robes catching the silver light, and chant words that had been passed down for centuries. The sound of the water in the fountain would mingle with their voices, and the flame in the temple would burn higher, as if in answer. The marble statues in the courtyard seemed to watch these gatherings. Each statue was of a past Virgo Vestalis Maxima, the chief priestess of her time. In daylight, their faces were calm and still, but at night, in the shifting light of torches, their expressions seemed to change. A trick of the firelight, perhaps, or something else. Some claimed that when the current Vestals performed the most ancient rites, the statue's eyes caught the light in a way that looked almost alive. The Temple of Vesta itself was unlike other temples in Rome, small and round. It held no statue of the goddess, only the sacred fire. In the night, the doorway glowed faintly with its light. The flame was fed with carefully chosen wood, and its smoke rose straight into the air, disappearing into the dark. The floor was swept clean, the altar brushed free of ashes, the tools arranged just so. Everything in the temple was done with precision, as if even the smallest detail mattered to the goddess Dot. It was said that if you were to stand in the temple alone at night, something no outsider could ever do, you might hear the faint rustle of movement behind the inner walls. Perhaps it would be the soft shift of robes, or the sound of a hand pouring grain into the fire, or perhaps it would be something older, the memory of centuries of ritual layered into the very stones. Even in the deepest hours before dawn, the Vestals did not sleep without watch. One or more would remain near the temple, tending to the flame, keeping an ear tuned to the night. If the fire threatened to fade, they would stir it back to life. If the wind carried sparks too close to the altar's edge, they would sweep them away. Their vigilance was constant, The safety of the city depended on it. When the first light of morning touched the Forum, the house of the Vestals returned to its more open face. The marble courtyard was bright again. The sound of footsteps came from the colonnades, and the fountain splashed cheerfully in the sunlight. The shadows retreated, and the hidden rituals of the night faded into the background. But they were not gone. They waited, as they always did, for the next night to fall. The house of the Vestals still stands today, though its walls are broken and its statues weathered. The fountains are dry, and the temple is an empty shell. But if you visit in the late evening, when the last of the tourists have gone and the Forum lies quiet under the sky, you might feel it, a stillness, a weight in the air, as though something lingers in the shadows of those walls. And perhaps, if you listen closely, you might hear it, the faint sound of water in a long, dry fountain, the soft murmur of women's voices speaking words no one has heard in centuries, and the steady, eternal crackle of a flame that burned for hundreds of years, holding Rome in its light. The murmurs in the necropolis long before Rome became the empire that would stretch across continents. It was a cluster of settlements on hills above the Tiber, and like all settlements, it needed a place for the dead. The living filled the Forum, with their markets and meetings, but the dead had their own quarters. The necropolis. The word itself means city of the dead. In ancient Rome, the necropolis was not hidden underground in vast catacombs, not at first. It was outside the sacred boundary of the city, along the roads that led away from the walls. Anyone traveling into or out of Rome would pass between lines of tombs. Some were simple stone markers. Others were elaborate monuments built to catch the eye of those passing by. Wealthy families wanted their names remembered, and travelers were their audience. The poor were buried in more modest graves, or in common grounds maintained by burial societies by day. These roads were busy. Merchants drove their carts past the tombs. Messengers on foot hurried along the edges. Children played among the stones. But at night, when the city gates closed and the traffic stopped, the necropolis changed. The air cooled. The carved faces on the tombs seemed to watch the road, and if you stood very still in the quiet, you might hear something faint, something like the murmur of voices. It was easy to imagine that the dead were talking to each other, trading news brought in by the last travelers of the day. The Romans believed that the spirits of the departed, the manes, lingered and could be honored or offended by the living. Families visited their ancestors' tombs on certain days each year, leaving offerings of food, wine, and flowers. These offerings were not just symbolic. Some tombs had small pipes built into them so that wine or milk could be poured directly to the earth where the body lay. Bread, cakes, figs, all placed where the spirit could partake in its own way. If a family neglected the rites, the spirit might become restless. Stories told of shades that whispered in dreams or appeared at night to demand proper offerings. The necropolis was full of such memories. In the still hours before dawn, when the only light came from the moon and the stars, those whispers might seem to rise from the very stones. The tombs themselves were like small houses, each with its own design. Some were shaped like temples with columns and pediments. Others were round, like watchtowers. Many had inscriptions in precise letters, telling who lay within, what they had done in life, and sometimes leaving a message for the living. Stop, traveler, and read my name. Remember me, and you will be remembered in turn. The richer tombs had carved reliefs showing scenes from the person's life: a merchant weighing goods, a soldier in armor, a mother with her children. In the moonlight, these carvings took on a strange depth, as if the figures might step out of the stone at any moment. As you walk deeper into the necropolis, the noise of the city fades until it is gone entirely. The gravel path crunches under your feet. On either side, the tombs rise, like silent sentinels. You notice that some have open doorways. Inside, niches where urns once stood, or benches where the living could sit during visits. A few have the remains of painted walls, faint colors that once told stories of the dead or of the gods who guarded them. You pause by a larger monument, its doorway sealed by a heavy stone slab. The inscription is worn but still legible. It names a family, all buried here over generations. The slab is carved with a wreath and a pair of crossed torches, the flames pointing downward, a symbol of life extinguished. You touch the stone, and it feels cool, almost damp. For a moment, you imagine that behind it, in the darkness of the burial chamber, the family sits together, speaking in low tones, their voices carrying through the earth to the surface as a faint, indistinct murmur. Further along, you pass simpler graves, stone chests half buried in the soil, marked only by a name and perhaps a date. Many are damaged, their lids shifted or cracked. Grass grows thick around them, and in the moonlight, the blades seem to sway without wind. Somewhere nearby, an owl calls. The sound is sharp in the stillness, but after it fades, the murmuring seems to return as if it had never stopped. Some Romans feared the necropolis after dark, believing that the Lemures, malevolent spirits, wandered then. To appease them, families performed rites during the Lemuria festival in May, walking barefoot through their homes at midnight, tossing black beans over their shoulders as an offering. But here, in the city of the dead, those rites would have been concentrated, the air heavy with the sense of unseen presences. You come to a crossroads within the necropolis, a meeting of two ancient paths. In the center stands a small shrine to the spirits of the crossroads, the Lyra's capitals. Its doorway is open, and inside is a niche where once a small statue stood. Now it is empty. The stones of the shrine are warm from the day's sun, but the air inside is cool, almost cold. You step back, unwilling to linger. Far ahead, the road climbs slightly. From the top, you can see the line of tombs stretching away in both directions, their shapes uneven against the sky. The moon casts shadows that seem too long, as if the tombs were taller than they are in daylight. You can hear the sound of water somewhere, perhaps a small stream that runs near the edge of the burial ground. It trickles softly, and the murmur of the dead seems to blend with it, creating a low, continuous sound that surrounds you. You realize that the necropolis in its way is as alive as the city it borders. The dead are remembered here, their names carved in stone, their likenesses frozen in relief. The living still walk these paths to honor them. The air holds the weight of centuries of offerings, prayers, and whispered names, Dot, as you turn back toward the gates of the city. The murmuring follows you for a while, fading only when the walls of Rome rise ahead. But you know that it will be there tomorrow night, and the night after, as constant as the moon above. Dot, the necropolis keeps its vigil, and its voices, whatever they are, will speak for as long as the stones stand. The edge of the empire, Britain's cold watch. The Romans liked to think of their empire as endless, its borders marked only by the seas and mountains. But in truth, there were edges, places where the roads stopped, where the stone walls ran out into open hills, and where the land beyond was not Rome at all. One of those edges was far to the northwest, in Britain. Here the winters were long, the skies low and gray, and the wind carried the taste of salt from distant coasts. To reach it from Rome meant weeks of travel, across the Alps, over the fields of Gaul, through damp forests, and across the cold channel. Waters. By the time a soldier stood on the ramparts of a fort along Hadrian's Wall, the heart of the empire was a memory, and the edge felt very real. Hadrian's Wall was not just a line of stone. It was an idea given form, the idea that the empire could decide where it ended, and that those beyond were to be kept out. Stretching across the width of Britain, it cut through hills, valleys, and rivers, linking a chain of forts, mile castles, and watchtowers. In the daylight, patrols walked its length, and farmers in the south could see the reassuring shape of it on the horizon. But at night, it was different. The cold deepened. The mist rose from the low ground and clung to the stones. The watchtowers became islands in the fog, their torches glowing faintly. The soldiers on duty wrapped their cloaks tight and listened for the distant howl of wolves, the rustle of movement in the grass beyond the wall, or the clink of armor from another guard. Inside the forts, life continued as best it could. Fires burned in the barracks, and the smell of wood smoke mixed with the damp air. Men played dice by lamplight, or mended gear. The sound of a hammer striking metal came from the smithy, slow and deliberate. Somewhere in the officers' quarters, a letter was being written, words meant for a home that might be months away. By ship and road, dot out beyond the wall, lay what the Romans called Barbaricum, the lands of the tribes who did not answer to Rome. At night, those lands were just darkness and silence, broken only by the wind and the heather and the call of night birds. The soldiers knew the names of the tribes, the Picts, the Selgovi, the Votadini, and the rumors about them. Sometimes the rumors were worse than the truth. Sometimes they were not. The fort's gates closed at dusk. The sentries took their positions. From the ramparts, you could see the land falling away to the north, empty under the moonlight. The wall itself cast a long shadow, and the patrols walked it in a steady rhythm. From one tower to the next, the glint of a helmet caught the light of a brazier, then vanished into the dark dot in the stillness. The sounds carried: the soft lap of water at a river crossing, the creak of leather straps as a soldier shifted his weight, the faint, high cry of a fox somewhere far beyond, and sometimes, though no one admitted it openly, the sound of voices in the distance, low and quick, speaking in a tongue that was not Latin. The wall was built to keep those voices far away, but at night They seemed closer. The Roman presence in Britain was a blend of discipline and adaptation. The forts along the wall were supplied from the south, but the men learned to use local materials to hunt in the hills, to barter with nearby villages. Still, the winters tested them. Snow drifted against the walls. The wind cut through the gaps in their armor. Fires burned low when wood was scarce, and in the deep hours of the night the thought crept in, what if the wall failed? You walk along the wall now, your boots crunching on the frost. The stone beneath your hand is cold and rough, built from blocks quarried nearby. You pass a mile castle, its small courtyard empty, the gate barred. The air smells of smoke from a fire that burns unseen. Ahead the path curves slightly, following the contour of the land. The moon breaks through the clouds, spilling pale light over the fields beyond. You can see the faint outline of ancient trackways, paths worn into the earth long before the Romans came. Somewhere out there, unseen, people are moving, perhaps hunters, perhaps scouts. The wall holds, but it cannot make the night empty dot in one of the watchtowers. A brazier burns. The guard leans against the parapet, his cloak pulled tight. He hears your approach and nods. The two of you stand in silence, looking north. From here the land seems endless, low hills, dark valleys, and a line of forest far away. Somewhere beyond that forest lies the sea, cold and restless. The guard speaks quietly, almost to himself. He says that some nights, when the mist is thick, it feels like the wall is floating, that there is no land on either side, only the stones and the sky. He says that on those nights the silence is so deep that you can hear your own heartbeat, and that sometimes you think you hear another one too, just behind you. You leave him to his post and walk on. The wall dips into a small valley, crossing a stream on a stone bridge. The water is dark, moving slowly under a skin of ice at the edges. The sound of it is steady, a soft counterpoint to the stillness. You climb back up the slope, feeling the pull in your legs. The cold settles in deeper here, and you pull your cloak tighter dot in the next fort. The gates are shut, but not barred. Inside, the central courtyard is quiet. The barracks doors are closed, and light leaks out through the cracks. Somewhere, a soldier laughs softly, a tired, almost private laugh. A dog trots past you, glancing up before disappearing between two buildings. The air smells of cooking grain dot as you pass the stables. You hear the shifting of hooves on straw, the slow, warm breath of horses. The animals are vital here for carrying messages, for patrolling the countryside, for hauling supplies. In the cold watch of winter nights, they are also a reminder of home for some of the men, especially those who came from farmlands in Gaul or Hispania. The commanding officer's quarters are quiet, but a light burns in an upper window. Inside, he may be reading reports from other forts, calculating supply needs, or simply staring into the fire, listening to the wind against the shutters. Even for officers, the edge of the empire can feel very far from the heart of it. When you leave the fort, the night feels colder. The wall stretches ahead, its line unbroken, but in truth it is always tested. Raids come suddenly, in the hours, before dawn or not at all for months. The waiting is its own kind of battle, one fought against time, cold, and the creeping weariness of always watching. Somewhere along the wall, a horn sounds, a single low note. It could be a signal between towers or simply a guard marking the change of watch. You pause and listen, but the sound does not come again. Only the wind moves now, rattling dry leaves in a ditch dot. By the time you reach the far tower, the sky has begun to pale. Dawn is slow here, the sun hidden behind low hills. The brazier burns low, the coals glowing red. The guard on duty nods to you, his face shadowed by his helmet. Beyond him the land stretches north, empty, waiting. The Romans would hold this wall for centuries, but they knew it was never unchallenged. The cold watch went on, night after night, in frost and rain, under the light of the moon and in the dark of clouded skies. And through it all, the edge of the empire was here, solid stone, patient sentries, and the long, endless horizon. Even now, the wall remains. The stones are worn, the forts are ruins, but the line can still be traced across the hills. Stand there on a winter night, and you might still feel it, the weight of the cold watch, the silence beyond, and the knowledge that the edge was never just a place. It was a state of mind, a way of standing between what was Rome and what was not, holding the line in the dark. In Rome, wealth was never just wealth. Gold could buy houses on the Palatine, the loyalty of soldiers, the applause of crowds, and it could also buy silence, exile, or death. In the glittering world of the imperial court, luxury and danger were never far apart. They often sat at the same table, dressed in the same fine fabrics, drinking from the same cups. The emperors who ruled the vast Roman world knew this better than anyone. They lived surrounded by marble and silk, attended by servants, guarded by soldiers. But they also lived with the quiet knowledge that many of the people smiling at them in the torchlight might be thinking about how to replace them. You imagine walking through the palace at night. The corridors are lined with columns, their capitals, carved with intricate leaves. Torches burn low in their brackets, the smoke drifting upward into the dim air. The marble floors are cool under your feet. Behind some doors there is the faint sound of voices, murmured conversations between senators or advisors, spoken too quietly to be overheard. Behind others, silence, broken only by the occasional scrape of a chair or the rustle of fabric in. These halls, power is a living thing. It moves with the people who hold it, and it changes hands faster than most will admit. An emperor might be loved in the morning, feared by midday, and dead by nightfall. The methods vary. A dagger in a corridor, a fall on a staircase, a cup of wine laced with something that leaves no visible mark. Poison was a favored tool for those who wished to avoid public scandal. It was silent, invisible, and, if used skillfully, could be mistaken for illness. Rome had its share of experts in such matters. The stories told of court physicians who could mix a dose so small that it killed over days, making the death look natural, or so strong that it ended life between one heartbeat and the next. Luxury and danger touched even the smallest details. The golden goblet, placed in front of an emperor at a banquet, might be the work of the finest artisans, its surface engraved with scenes from mythology. The wine inside could be from the best vineyards in Campania, aged perfectly. And yet, if someone had decided the emperor's time had come, that same cup might also hold the means of ending his reign before the feast was over. You see the banquet in your mind, long tables covered with embroidered cloths, platters of roasted game, bowls of fruit, baskets of bread. The guests wear togas edged with purple, their necks and wrists heavy with gold. Laughter rises and falls like the music played by the musicians in the corner. Slaves move silently, refilling cups and clearing plates. And somewhere in the room, perhaps in the kitchen, perhaps at the very table, someone is thinking not of the food, but of the fate of the man who sits at the center. Some emperors tried to guard themselves against such dangers. They kept food. Tasters trusted men who would take a bite or sip before anything reached imperial lips. They rotated their household staff to prevent anyone from building too much familiarity with their routines. They carried their own sealed jars of wine to banquets, and they never ate a dish unless they had seen it prepared. But in Rome, trust was as fragile as glass. Even the tasters could be bribed, the seals broken, the most loyal servants tempted. By promises or threats, gold, for all its beauty, could be as deadly as poison. It fueled the ambitions of those who wanted the throne. An emperor's wealth was the most visible symbol of his power, and taking it meant taking everything: the palaces, the titles, the control of legions. Men who had once been friends could become rivals overnight when they saw the possibility of wearing the purple. The paranoia this created was not a weakness, it was a survival skill. Some emperors, like Domitian, moved through their palaces with a mirror-polished surface of calm, but their eyes were always watching, weighing each word, each gesture. Others, like Tiberius in his later years, withdrew almost entirely, keeping themselves at a distance from anyone who might be a threat, which was nearly everyone. You walk now into the emperor's private chambers. The walls are hung with tapestries, showing hunting scenes, the floor covered with mosaics of intricate patterns. A single lamp burns on a table, its light glinting off a tray of rings and coins. In the corner stands a chest, its lock heavy and ornate. Inside might be gold coins stamped with the emperor's image, or letters sealed in wax, containing promises and threats that could shift the balance of power if revealed. Even here, in the most private rooms, safety is an illusion. The emperor's bed is guarded by a soldier outside the door. But what if that soldier is loyal to someone else? What if the poison is not in the food, but in the perfume oil rubbed into the skin, or the makeup applied by a trusted hand? Rome had seen such methods before. The empire's history was full of sudden deaths that left behind more questions than answers. The greatest irony was that the same gold that brought luxury also brought danger. The more an emperor displayed his wealth, the more he reminded others of what could be gained by replacing him. A simple villa might attract less envy than a palace lined with precious stones, but an emperor could no more live simply than the sun could hide its light. You think of the long list of emperors whose reigns ended violently. Claudius, allegedly poisoned by his own wife, Commodus strangled in his bath, Caracalla cut down on the road, Caligula stabbed in the very palace where he had once walked in triumph. The details differ, but the pattern is the same. Power attracts those who wish to hold it, and wealth makes them impatient. In the quiet of the night, the palace is still. The gold glows faintly in the torchlight. The shadows are long and deep. Somewhere in the darkness, footsteps sound, soft, measured, moving closer. And in the air, faint and almost imagined, is the scent of wine cooling in a cup. Here, in Rome, the line between celebration and death was always thin. An emperor might raise a goblet and a toast, the hall echoing, with cheers, and never know until the last swallow whether he had just secured his reign or ended it. The road from Rome to the coast was a straight ribbon of stone. By day, it hummed with the sound of wagons carrying grain, wine, olive oil, and the countless goods that kept the capital alive. But as the sun dipped toward the western horizon, the traffic thinned. Shadows lengthened across the paving stones. The air took on a cooler, sharper taste, the scent of the sea. Ostia, Rome's main port, was never silent. Even after dusk, its heartbeat continued. The creak of ropes, the slap of waves against wooden hulls, the shouts of sailors in languages from every corner of the empire, all mingled into a sound that belonged to no other place. Yet at night, those sounds changed. They became softer, more measured, more secretive. You walk into the harbor district just as the last light fades from the sky. The street lamps, small clay bowls of oil, flicker to life along the quayside. Their light is uneven, throwing long shadows over the stone warehouses and the wooden piers. The air smells of salt, fish, tar, and the faint sweetness of spices, packed in crates for the morning market. Somewhere far out in the darkness, a bell rings twice, its tone swallowed by the sea. Ships are moored along the docks, tall merchant vessels, with their sails furled and their masts like bare trees against the night sky. Smaller boats bob gently in their berths, the water beneath them whispering against the hulls. You can hear the creak of wood expanding and contracting with the night's moisture, and the slow groan of thick ropes shifting with the tide. Along the quays, sailors sit in small groups, their voices low. Some play at dice, tossing the bones onto an upturned crate. Others mend nets by the light of a single lantern. A few keep watch over the cargo, amphories stacked in neat rows, each one sealed with clay and marked with the merchant's symbol. The marks tell a story. Wine from Gaul, oil from Hispania, garum from the coast of Baetica, marble from the quarries of Greece dot beyond the piers. The taverns glow with a warmer, more inviting light. The sound of a lyre drifts out into the street, mixed with laughter and the thud of mugs on wooden tables. These are places where sailors and dock workers drink together, where deals are made in the corners, and where rumors travel faster than the tide. Ostia at night draws not only those who work by day, but also those who prefer the cover of darkness. In a shadowed alley between two warehouses, a man waits, his cloak pulled close. Another approaches, his footsteps quick but quiet. They speak for a moment, exchange a small object wrapped in cloth, and then part without a word more. The port is a place of commerce, but not all commerce is recorded in the ledgers. You move closer to the water. The wind off the sea is stronger. Here, carrying the cry of gulls and the faint rumble of waves breaking further out. Across the dark water, you can just make out the silhouette of the great lighthouse, its flame a steady glow guiding ships toward the safety of the harbor. Even from this distance, you can hear the rhythmic clang of the machinery inside as the keepers tend it. A gang of dock workers passes by, carrying sacks of grain to a ship that will sail at dawn. Their feet thump on the wooden planks, their breath visible in the cool night air. They speak little, focused on their task. The cargo must be ready before the first light touches the water. Rome depends on it. The city consumes more than it produces, and every ship that docks here helps feed the countless mouths of the capital dot. Further along the quay, a foreign ship is unloading under torchlight. The crew wears unfamiliar tunics, their speech quick and clipped, full of sounds you do not recognize. The cargo is strange as well. Carved ivory, bolts of cloth dyed in colors deeper than the Roman market usually sees, jars sealed with wax instead of clay. A scribe stands nearby, making notes on a wax tablet, his eyes flicking often toward the shadows, as if aware of how tempting this cargo might be. You notice a narrow set of steps leading down to the water's edge. Here, the smaller fishing boats come and go at all hours. One is just returning now, its single sail lowered, its oars dipping quietly into the water. The two men aboard pull up alongside the steps, tying the boat with quick, practiced movements. They carry up baskets of fish still glistening from the sea, their scales catching the torchlight like fragments of silver. Not far from here, a woman stands at the end of a pier, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Perhaps she is waiting for a ship, or for someone aboard it. The wind lifts the edge of her cloak, and for a moment she seems carved from stone, still, enduring, timeless dot above it all. The stars are bright. The sea reflects them in shifting patterns, each wave bending the light. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of the lighthouse, other ships are making their way toward Ostia, their sails lowered, their oars steady, aiming to arrive under the safety of night. Some carry legal cargo, others do not. In the darkness, it is difficult to tell which is which. The port has its own rhythm, different from the city. It does not sleep. Even as one ship settles into the calm of the harbor, another sets out, its crew working silently in the dark. Crates are moved from one vessel to another without ever touching the shore. Contracts are spoken, not written. Promises are made with a clasp of hands dot as you turn back toward the inland road. The sound of the port follows you, the low groan of a hull shifting against the pier, the murmur of distant voices, the faint metallic ring of a hammer on a ship's fittings. The scent of salt lingers in your hair and on your skin. Ostia at night is a place between worlds, between land and sea, between law and secrecy, between the known and the unknown. It will still be awake long after the inland villas are quiet, and it will greet the dawn with the same mixture of honesty and intrigue it has known for centuries. It is easy to think of ancient Rome as something distant, a city of marble and togas that exists only in history books and ruins. But Rome has a way of lingering, Its streets may be broken, its buildings collapsed, yet the rhythms and anxieties of its people still echo in our own lives. The fears that move through those vast stone corridors have not truly vanished. They have simply changed their shape. Imagine standing in the Roman Forum at dawn. The modern city is awake around it, cars, scooters, footsteps on pavement. But here, within the old heart of the empire, the sound is different. You can still trace the outlines of the basilicas and temples. The paving stones are worn smooth by centuries of feet, and if you close your eyes, it is not difficult to hear the faint rustle of a toga, the murmur of voices in Latin, the clang of a smith's hammer echoing from somewhere nearby. The world is different now, yet the questions are the same. In ancient Rome, people worried about power and safety, about whether the grain shipments would arrive, about the loyalty of those they trusted. Today, the forms have changed. The grain is replaced by supply chains, the legions by modern armies, the marble palaces by glass towers. But the concerns remain familiar. Rome's fears were not always grand and political. They lived in the small, everyday moments. A merchant wondering if his ship would survive the winter storms. A mother hoping her child's fever would break. A soldier counting the days until he could return home. These are fears we still recognize. They are the quiet companions of human life. And then there were the mysteries, the things that could not be explained, even by the most learned minds of the empire. Strange lights seen over the hills at night. A ship found drifting empty in the harbor, its cargo untouched. The sudden disappearance of a man who had walked the same route home for years. Rome recorded victories and laws, but these smaller, unsettling events rarely found their way into the official accounts. They lingered instead in whispers, in the corners of taverns, in stories passed from one generation to the next. In this way, the ancient city was not so different from our own. Even now, in the age of electricity and satellites, there are shadows that seem too deep for light to reach. A quiet street at night can still carry the same weight as a Roman alley, where the only sound is the echo of your own footsteps. The human mind has not forgotten how to imagine what might be watching from the dark. Walk down a narrow modern street, not in Rome, but in your own city, and you might notice how the old patterns remain. The way a building's facade can seem to lean in over you, the way certain windows stay unlit even when all the others glow. Ancient Rome's neighborhoods were full of these same architectural moods. Open squares bathed in light, and sudden turns into shadowed passageways where the air was cooler and the noise from the main road faded to nothing. The empire's great monuments have left their mark in another way too. We still build in stone and steel to last, but the permanence we seek is an illusion. Rome's aqueducts once brought fresh water across miles of countryside. Now they stand in broken arches, their purpose long gone. Today's skyscrapers may seem solid, but time will change them as surely as it changed Rome. And yet, there is something comforting in this. The Romans themselves knew that nothing was eternal. They built, they rebuilt, they let ruins become part of the city rather than erasing them completely. It is why Rome today is a layering of centuries, not a single frozen moment, but a slow accumulation of life. The same will be true for our own cities. When night falls, the distance between then and now seems to shrink even further. In the quiet, you can imagine walking streets where the lamps are oil rather than electric, where the sound of hooves and wagon wheels replaces the hum of engines. The same human instincts guide your steps, the draw toward light, the awareness of who else is near, the sense of caution in unfamiliar places. Perhaps that is what keeps Rome alive in our minds, the knowledge that its people were not so different. From us, they dreamed of better futures, feared unseen dangers, and found ways to live with both. Their world was filled with grandeur, but it was also filled with the small, unrecorded moments. The cup of wine shared between friends, the pause at a doorway before stepping into the dark, the glance over a shoulder to see if someone was following. These moments have a way of slipping past centuries. They are carried in the way we tell stories, in the way we design our streets, and the way we light our homes at night. Even when we do not consciously think of Rome, we move through spaces it has shaped, and so the ancient dreams of safety, of prosperity, of being remembered remain with us. So do the shadows, the awareness that some fears will never be entirely gone. The Romans lived with both, and so do we. If you were to stand tonight on a quiet balcony, looking out at your own city, you might notice the same contrasts they did. Light and dark, noise and silence, certainty and doubt. You might feel the same mixture of comfort and unease that they once felt when looking out over their streets. And you might understand in that moment that the empire never fully ended. It simply changed its form, leaving its echoes for us to find.